All set, go ahead.
Great. Thank you, Jen. Welcome, everybody, to this first workshop of the day of our full day of pre-conference workshops for the SUNY Digital Learning Conference on Educating for Digital Citizenship. I'm Paul Schacht. I'm the director of the Center for Digital Learning at SUNY Geneseo. I'm joined by conference co-organizers Ed Beck at SUNY Oneonta and Jen Snyder, whom you just heard from at SUNY Center for Professional Development. We're thrilled to see you here for a workshop that's being presented by our friends at Reclaim Hosting, Taylor Jaden and Maren Deepwell. And they're going to lead a workshop entitled Reclaiming Our Socials and How You Can Too, Reclaim Hosting's Journey to Demonstrate Digital Agency. And I will let you, Maren and Taylor, take it away.
Thank you so much, Paul, and hello, everybody. We are thrilled to be here as part of this year's conference, and yeah, we're really looking forward to a fun interactive session. As we just heard, we're going to be talking about reclaiming our socials and share some of the lessons learned from our journey to, increase our digital agency and navigate this fragmented social media landscape. This is going to be a very interactive session, and you'll be able to participate via chat. And Taylor and I would love to hear from you if you're just joining us. Maybe post in the chat where you're joining us from and say hello so that we can get that conversation going. There'll also be some interactive sessions. But before we jump in, I just wanted to introduce ourselves. So Taylor, if we go on to the next slide, let's just give everybody a quick sense of who we are and what's in store. There are three of us behind this workshop today, and Taylor and I want to give a big shout out to Amanda, our colleague who unfortunately can't be with us live here today. But it was Amanda who I think came up with the idea for the workshop originally and submitted the proposal. So we are hoping to do her proud today and give her a big shout out now. We're very excited to be presenting this workshop. As you heard, we're from Reclaim Hosting, and Taylor and I are looking forward to sharing our experience with you today. So Taylor, if we go on to the next slide, here is an overview of what's in store. To begin with, Taylor is going to tell you a little bit about how our story started and why we started on this journey to reclaim our social networks and platforms and tools. Then we're going to be talking about a couple of different activities. One is around visitors and residents using David White's foundational model. And that is going to help us with the discussion as well. And then we are going to share some practical lessons learned and showcase our own approach, and then give you a pre-mortem activity as well on how this could work for you. So whether you're looking at use of social media as an educator or other professional, if you're looking at it for project, maybe research, maybe a student group, maybe a particular course, hopefully the discussion today will be really relevant for you and give you lots of practical resources to take away. And we are recording this, and there'll be lots of resources in case you need to leave early. So before I hand over to Taylor, there's one more slide I want to cover because we're very excited to be here as part of this conference. As you know, we've been working with SUNY for a long time, particularly in domains of one's own. And we did include some links here to SUNY Create and also the showcase. And if you're new to the work that we do with you as a community and you want to have a look at all the fabulous projects that are happening all across the community, then please follow that showcase link and be inspired by what's possible. We are going to be looking at tools and services and platforms that can all be used on your own domain or in relationship with that. So hopefully within your community of institutions, you already have everything to get you started. We are now entering our second decade as an independent company, and we provide educators and institutions with all kinds of solutions for domains and web hosting. And our emphasis really as a company is on building capability and empowering educators to really take control of the technology and the platforms that we use. This is something I know Taylor and I are really passionate about, and we hope to share some very practical takeaways as part of that journey with you today. Now, I think, Taylor, I've covered everything in the intro. Is there anything I've missed?
No, I don't think so. So yeah, I'm as Marin said, I'm really excited for the workshop today, and I think we're both really excited about the workshop today. And I did just put the links to, of course, SUNY's domain name on SUNY Create in the Zoom chat if you haven't seen that. But also, I really recommend checking out that showcase page that I know some folks here have put work in to make it a lively, encourage submissions to it and things like that. It's a fantastic way to browse what people are doing with that platform, and very much related to a lot of stuff we're going to talk about today. Um, to kind of kick things off, I will say I'm having a weird issue with my my browser really quick, so I need to kind of restart this slideshow. I can't. May have to reshare my screen here, so sorry about that. But my slides are acting funny. So
No
yeah.
worries. That's all part of the digital journey. It's, figuring out what happens when technology doesn't work so well. So I think everybody in the room will be familiar with that. But what we're going to start off with is really thinking about, the context of where we started our journey. And actually, I was very excited to be able to talk a little bit about that journey that we've been on, because that's one of the projects that Taylor and I worked on together last year as we were kind of starting to think about changes in the social media landscape. Changes to Twitter or X and other platforms for newsletters. So, Taylor, I think that's where our kind of journey really began, the kind of changes that we were seeing across the landscape and the networks.
Yeah, I mean, obviously as a web hosting company, we're very much thinking about, web presence and, what it means to take ownership over a web presence. And that's not necessarily like a new line of thinking for us as a company. I mean, that is very much core to what we're about. But I think the last couple of years we've really shifted that, or maybe expanded that, I guess is the right word I'm looking for, in terms of other related web presences, right? So we've been thinking a lot about where we are putting time and energy essentially into platforms we don't control, and where that makes sense, what the risks are, what are our contingencies. Like, if very very important to us is having a place where we can have a sense of community with folks who are using tools that we provide. So where can people ask questions, where can we ask questions of them, all that kind of stuff is really important to us. And it's just painfully obvious that if those things are important to you as a person, or you as a company, or whatever context you're coming from, that you have to have ownership over at least some of those tools. You have to have a game plan other than, oh, well, our community's left Twitter, so I guess we just don't have one anymore, right? Like, so the a lot of the changes in the way these companies have operated, and what they're allowing, what they're not allowing, where the audience has gone, has sparked a lot of this for us. And so we have been making a really concerted effort to think about, again, what are our contingency strategies? Where are we putting the most time and effort into building communities? And what does that mean for our day-to-day? What does that mean for the folks who are engaging with us as a company? All of that kind of stuff. So we kind of starting our starting points, like I said, is we're not unfamiliar with the idea of owning a web presence, having a website, posting to that website, making sure we're using open tools like WordPress that we can host in a myriad of different ways, and on different platforms, and can take different forms over time. And so what we wanted to do was not necessarily completely leave everything that isn't open source or self-hostable behind, but again, focus on where our weaknesses were, essentially, where we identified, hey, this is a risky thing that we're engaging with over here. What can we do about it, basically? There's a lot of been movement for many years now, but especially in the last few years with a lot of these social media landscape changes happening towards tools on the Fediverse. So those are tools like Mastodon and even actually Threads, Facebook's competitor to Twitter, actually has some limited integration with the Fediverse, which essentially those tools are all about, hey, how can we have a social media platform that can talk to other social media platforms, and you can bring your people who are following your presence with you, and you can make choices about who you want to do business with or decide to keep your web presence with. So the Fediverse was very interesting to us, but it wasn't specifically just about using those types of tools. It was trying to take a little bit more holistic and realistic approach for us as a company. So what we want to kind of kick things off here with is a activity of visitor resident mapping. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with showing what where our landscape was at as a company a few years ago, what we were doing, where we were situated. We're going to talk about visitor resident mapping as an activity and just what is visitor resident mapping. And then we're also going to ask you all to do your own visitor resident mapping for either yourself, or it could be like a department or something you're affiliated with. We'll kind of talk about what that might mean for you. But we're going to start. I'm going to start by showing an example of a visitor resident map, or at least something like one for Reclaim Hosting as a company just a few years ago. Like I said, if you're unfamiliar, and I imagine many of you are, visitor resident mapping it's a visualization technique, is kind of how I would describe how we're going to use it today. But there's the idea of online spaces where you are a visitor and online spaces where you are in resident mode, essentially. And spaces where you're a visitor are spaces where you leave behind almost no social trace. So you may go and do like a Google search for a recipe. That doesn't really leave behind much about you. It's just you seeking out information, essentially. Where spaces where you are resident are spaces where you are sort of contributing or planting a stake in the ground, or just leaving behind anything about yourself. Again, this is a little bit interesting because we're coming at this from the context of a company, so it's not the self, right? But it's still going to be a useful visualization tool, I think. So spaces where you're a resident may be social media spaces that you post to. They may be a blog that you have and write, or it could even just be like a personal website that you have, this is my work and links to, maybe research I've done or something like that. Those are definitely resident spaces. Where this gets interesting is that this is not really a binary thing. It's a continuum. So there are definitely places where you are more resident than others. So a good example for me actually would have been Twitter, actually. So I had a Twitter account, me Taylor, but I didn't really post that much, right? So I posted a little bit. It's not like I left no social trace. I used my real name on Twitter, but I didn't really contribute that much. So I would call that as something in the middle between visitor resident, at least for me personally. Maren,
I really love that idea. Yeah, I think that's awesome. And like you, I think, and like many folk here in the room, I also kind of thought about this as a professional on a personal level? Like, where am I visible? Where am I putting things, putting content? And how is that being exploited? And also, where is the organization that I represent or work for, or the project that I represent or work for? How is that like situated? So I'm really excited to explore this map, and I love this model. I'm sure many people are familiar with this visitor residence model as a kind of foundational way of thinking about these digital spaces. But I think it's such a useful tool to kind of start thinking about that. So are you ready to share the map?
Yeah. So the way this is going to work, we'll put this link in. Oops. This is, I don't know what is going on with my slides here. I may have to switch browsers for a second.
No
But
worries. I'll put the link in the chat in the meantime. So if you'd like to have a look, I've posted 2 links in the chat now. One is to David White's visitor and residence background, in case you'd like to explore that. And then there's also the link to the map that Taylor's made that he's going to talk us through in just a minute, where we're going to be exploring and also then inviting you to consider where you are currently on your journey with social media. Are there spaces you're visiting at the moment? Are you lurking anywhere on social media? Like, I know I was a long time Mastodon lurker because I just didn't know what to post, and I didn't know whom to follow or where even to find the people to follow. And similarly, are you somewhere where you're really resident? Do you have your own blog? Is it an internal internet space? Is it on Mattermost, or maybe on Slack or Microsoft Teams or Zoom? Or where would you be describing your practice as being a resident in a digital social space? I think that's a really interesting question, particularly in the kind of context of having a domain of your own, having an institutional domain, and how that all fits together. So for me personally, I was saying this to Taylor as we were preparing for the workshop, leaving leaving Twitter, which was my biggest network that I'd had for over a decade, was really difficult. But I felt that it was a good step to kind of reinvent my professional presence. And yeah, it was really good to be able to look at that. So as you can see on the map now that Taylor's brought up, there's one axis which goes from personal to professional, from top to bottom. So that's the vertical axis, and then the horizontal one goes from visitor to resident. And I think if you click on the link, Taylor, everybody can make their own map, and you can just use pen and paper. But we're going to spend the next sort of 10-15 minutes all together working through this. So we invite you to definitely, start having your own map and putting some of the tools and spaces that you're on onto the map.
Yeah, I'm gonna do a little bit of example here. I'll start with kind of where we were at as Reclaim as a company, and I'll kind of talk through my thought process here, and then we'll give you some time so you can make your own map. I mean, if you've done this before, you want to start, go for it. But if you're like, I'm still not getting it, and it's one of those things that's easier to understand if you've seen and heard someone's thought process going through. Of course, as a company, the context of personal and professional in the y-axis definitely makes less sense. This is the visitor resident mapping works best as an individual, but this is something that we did kind of internally to try to visualize our own representation on the web at Reclaim. And I could imagine this being really useful for a non-individual context too, like a department or a project you're involved with even. So for this, I'm going to use the personal access is more like not directly related to customer and business stuff. So more fun type things. I mean, it's obviously all related to like communication, but that's kind of how I'm going to map the y-axis for us. But that's one of my favorite things about visitor resident mapping is you can kind of tweak it, and this concept is simple enough that it does still work. So kind of starting for us at Reclaim here, we had a few spaces. So our first main big space, definitely resident, is our main website. So it was reclaimhosting.com. It is very much a space that, it's our main web presence, and we it describes, what we do as a company. I think it does communicate some of our personality as a company. So while it's definitely professional, I think it actually does kind of dip into the personal for us. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put reclaimhosting.com on the map here. And I forgot to mention one important thing. When you click the make map button, this is your own map. We are not going to see this. You don't have to share this. We're going to talk about it. I invite you to tell us what about your map in a little while. But this is your own personal maps. We're not all doing this particular exercise together. So you can make that as private as you want, basically. So what I'm actually going to do here is I'm going to, because I've kind of positioned this way over on the side of resident and definitely professional, I actually like to draw boxes and kind of make boundaries on my visitor resident mapping. You don't necessarily have to do this, but I would say ours definitely goes professional, but definitely is a little bit personal too. Like some of our personality as a company definitely comes through here. So I'm going to put this little box around my particular entry here in reclaimhosting.com. So that was, obviously it's our web presence. We didn't use the website for a lot of direct communication. So there was a component to the website that employees could syndicate their blog posts into the website, or still can. So basically, like if I, Taylor, posted about something related to work on my own blog, that could show up on the website if I wanted it to as an employee. But that's not really the same thing as Reclaim Hosting as a company, right? And that's what this particular map and obviously our presentation is about. So I wouldn't necessarily include that. It was very resident, but it lacked a timely communication aspect for us as a company. Another one, obviously, most people use and are familiar with, email. That was our main timely communication thing. So of course we email customers. Most of the time we only email customers with things that were specific and technical and they needed to know about. So it wasn't really like a community building thing. It was more, hey, we're having maintenance happening, and things like that. I would argue for us in this context, email was extremely it was mostly a visitor activity. And the reason I say that is because there's no way for folks to discover us via email. You had to already be involved. And it wasn't really anything about us as a company. It was just technical communication, certainly extremely professional. So I'm going to put email down here. And
I love that, Taylor. That's so interesting. Like I was just thinking what I would put on my map, and I don't think I think email would have slipped under the radar for me. Like, and that's definitely the vast majority of of what I do in the digital kind of, like email and direct messages, probably like 90% of the communication I do. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, and email itself could, yeah, it's definitely one you can, in certain contexts, not think about. But there are all kinds of other contexts where email may look different, right? Like, let's say I, Taylor, wrote an email newsletter that went to, and it was popular and went to a lot of people. Or even if it wasn't popular, actually, the number of people is kind of not that relevant. Then I may put it more resident, right? Like that. Okay, this is a tool I'm using and intentionally using in a very different way. For us, I wouldn't put it all the way visitor. Obviously, it's communication that other people saw, but it wasn't really, it's not evidence of our work
Yeah.
as a company out into the world, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that makes complete sense, and that's really helpful.
Yeah, so the next tool I'll move on to would have been Twitter. So we definitely did use Twitter. Twitter definitely walked the line. There was fun stuff on Twitter. There was, more professional communication on Twitter. to some extent, but I would say it lent to more fun type things. Sorry, it was most often more fun kind of communication. Definitely resident to some extent, not as much about us out there on Twitter as our website, but so I would probably map it like here. And as you can tell, this is not highly scientific, right? So, I'm thinking this activity is really, I'm hoping will encourage you to kind of think about and enumerate the spaces you're in more than anything. So I'll put it like here. That feels right to me. And we have a presence on YouTube, and specifically like a video series, video podcast type thing called Reclaim Today. So that was definitely more fun, right? We wouldn't put like maintenance and technical communication there, but more about what we were interested in as a company and what people who worked here were interested in. That was on, like I said, on YouTube. Definitely resident though. So I would put that over here personally.
I think to me, like the type of distinction between kind of operational updates, like, in our case, hosting, security, that kind of maintenance stuff. I think if you work in education, there'll probably be, project management meetings, the kind of, day-to-day running of courses, like curriculum planning, that sort of stuff. That is not really something that you would necessarily share externally. So, it's very much like the equivalent of our kind of maintenance and kind of internal operational updates. Even though they're important for customers, they're not like important for the public. But then if you have stuff like, hey, we finished a research project, or there's a case study, or there's a student showcase, that would then be something where you're like, oh, I want to be a lot more, engaging with the wider community. That's lots more about public engagement. That's kind of how I kind of visualize this.
Yeah, and yeah, I think really you could include all kinds of spaces. This really for us as a company at Reclaim was kind of it a few years ago. This is pretty much it. Typically individuals have more, right? So I've done a lot of my own visitor resident maps for workshops kind of like this. And typically I have more tools on here for myself. And definitely some of them are not open web tools. So for instance, we'll talk about this one, but I use Discord both personally and professionally, actually. And I don't know honestly where I map that as. And if you're unfamiliar, Discord is a mostly text and voice based communication tool with with different groups of people. So they can be small groups. They can also be very large groups. So I personally don't put a lot of myself out there on Discord. So maybe it's somewhere in the middle between visitor and resident if I was to map that for me as a person. But it's definitely not an open web tool, right? That's a proprietary tool that you can log into they do have a website version, but it requires an account, things like that.
Do you think we could maybe use a different color and add some personal bits in there just so folks in the room can see an example? I wonder whether that could be a nice addition there, because I imagine many folk in the room will have profiles like LinkedIn, or maybe on Threads, or maybe you're on Blue Sky, depending on where you are, like, or MetaMost. It'd be exciting to hear if any of you are in a chat here right now, maybe add some tools that you would put on your map, so that we can maybe just add a couple of examples here. You don't necessarily have to add where you would add them, but maybe just tell us what kind of digital spaces you would put on your map.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I can make another map for myself here too. So in fact, I'll label it as such so it's not confusing. But the this does obviously look different for every single person. That's kind of the whole point. But yeah, so for myself, if I was to quickly put some tools on here, where I'm resident, I do have my own website, and there's plenty. Basically, the only thing on it is whatever I'm interested in at that time. So definitely resident, and it's a mishmash of personal and professional stuff. Honestly, at this point, maybe a little bit more professional than personal. Um, there is, I do use Instagram, and that's definitely personal and resident. I use Mastodon, and that is somewhat resident, but I definitely read a lot more than I post. And that is definitely personal and professional. Honestly, this is a weird one where I could probably like throw it in the middle a little bit. Oops.
I'm really excited about this, what you just said, because you just said, oh, it could be everything. And I'm really interested that you say that, because I have that a lot with, where things intersect for me, like some public platforms like Mastodon. I am definitely also on in a professional and in a non-professional capacity. And I wonder what folk in the room, like we're starting to get a few contributions in the chat about platforms that folk are using. So we have Slack and Teams and a platform called Viva Engage or Yammer, to be used to communicate between institutions. Ed's also suggesting Basecamp, which I think is an awesome example of, residents. Like, I'm assuming that's mostly resident space for you, Ed, just because I'm imagining that that's where a lot of planning and project management happens. So,
And
yeah, I
even that, though, it
really
depends on the
like
context,
that.
right? Like you may be
Yeah.
considering planning and project management not something about you, but your work is part of you, right? So sometimes this does matter from what your objective is when you're doing this type of mapping. That's one of the things about it. But my main argument when you're making these maps is that you should be consistent in the moment that you're making them, so that you can kind of try to draw some conclusions throughout the process of making the map.
And maybe just to add as well, so one of the reasons why we wanted to start with kind of visualizing it today was to kind of think about, where we've been on this journey and where we got to a few years later, because that's the second part of the session that we want to think about is, how did things change? And so we want to, Taylor, I'm just looking at the time. So it's just nearly 33 past the hour. So do you think now is a good time? Like, we can obviously keep drawing and making the map as people are contributing, but
Yep.
do you think now is a good time to give folk like five or 10 minutes? Or what do you think about making so everybody can make their own map?
Yeah, let's give folks 5 minutes to make a map. In fact, I'll put a little timer on screen. That'll work.
We have some other contributions here. Annie says GitHub, and then Ed's mentioned also Orchid. Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. So yeah, we'll give everybody 5 minutes. And then if you would like to share a picture of your map in the chat, we'd love to see it and see what you make of it.
Oh, and I did mention this too. The mapping tool I'm showing here, of course, you can feel free to use that. If you prefer to use pen and paper, that's great. Pen and paper works really well for this too. So use whatever feels right in the moment. But I just now am realizing how distracting this countdown probably is. So I may just stop my sharing my screen for a little bit, and I'll pull it back up when we're close.
Yeah, maybe I'm just seeing, Taylor, that people are still joining the session. Maybe we leave the link up, the slide with the link on it, just if folk are just joining us, then welcome to you all. We are just getting started with our first activity, and we can see, yeah, we now have 30 people in the room. You are so welcome, and we are just doing our first activity.
And about 3 minutes left. Got about a minute and a half. And when time's up, we'll kind of talk about maps. Definitely we'll invite folks to share them in Zoom chat. Some people already have. Or even if you don't want to do that, you can we'll ask you questions about maps. And so you're free to really at any time turn your camera on if you want to, but definitely also encourage to use either the Zoom chat or unmuting and just speaking up to participate in just under a minute here in about. Okay, and that's time. Yeah, pencils down. um, but um, so we do have a few questions that we kind of want to kind of help explore the map that you just created. Like I said, if you want to post your actual map in the Zoom chat, that's awesome. Feel free to do that. That's great. I already have some questions about based on what I'm seeing here, so that's great. But also, you don't have to. We can just ask you about it. I guess the first thing I wanted to do, and I'm just gonna before we even get into more specific stuff, is Ed, because you were the first to share and you just turned your camera on. So I'm going to ask you a little bit about your map here, if you're willing to share. So can you just kind of take us through a quick tour of what's on your map and what why you put where I should say?
Yeah, happy to do that. Um, I in the bottom right hand corner, I put my edbeck.com website. I kind of got hooked into a group of people called the indie web a while ago. People who believe in building your own website, having your own domain with your name on it, and posting there first, and then only sharing to like corporate social media after you've published on your own website. So that's one of the ways that I control my own content, and that influenced where I put those boxes around. Where if I share something I'm really proud of on LinkedIn, it's most likely that I put it on my own blog first, and then I shared it on LinkedIn with a link or a sharing link from my blog. And that means that I kind of own that content and keep that. And even if I use LinkedIn less in the future, I still have that piece. So that's why those boxes are there around there. That a lot of times I publish things on edbeck.com first and then share it on Mastodon or LinkedIn or someplace else. I threw my Orchid ID up there. That's more aspirational for me. I want to use that more and to make sure that the work that I'm doing in my scholarly work gets connected with my online digital footprints and social media, although my output is sporadic and I want to get better at that. I'm also part of a bunch of like Slack groups, and the way I would describe that, these are closed groups for communities that I participate in, places like ID to ID, WP Campus. I would even include in that kind of box right there the Discord communities that I participate in. The like Reclaim Hosting hosts one of people who are interested in digital humanities and website stuff. And then, I'm not as active, but I also have like Viva Engage on there. That's the Yammer platform. That's the Microsoft platform that SUNY shares. And that's the bottom part of my thing, my professional side. And then I put Facebook and Instagram on there. I kind of cheated Facebook a little bit towards the professional side because I don't use that heavily for very social things anymore. And even the social things that I share there, I try to I keep a mindset of there of like, what if somebody from my professional circles did look there? It is more social, but it's not as fun as it used to be, in the early 2000s. And then I lean more I lean less professional on Instagram.
Thanks. Yeah. And that all makes perfect sense. One of the things I want to mention, because this I think will very much come up throughout the workshop, that you specifically talked about was with the indie web stuff and your own website, of the concept of posting on your own site. There's actually like an acronym the indie web folks use, POSSE, right? Post on site, syndicate elsewhere. It's this concept of you post on a space you control first, and then you can link to that from other places. And that is something that I am currently all like trying to do more and more. And it's one of those strategies for taking ownership that sometimes if you go Google right now, post on site, syndicate elsewhere, you're going to get a lot of like technical like documentation stuff of like, here's how you automate all of this, and like, here's how you do this. And that's great if that's what you want to do. But I think the more important thing is the core concept of, posting on a place you control, and then now it's on the web, so you can link to it almost anything that allows you to link to something, which is, most tools. Now you have that capability. So that is definitely going to be a pattern that comes up, and something that we are always striving to do better sort of at Reclaim, but also me personally am striving to do more of. So thanks for sharing your map. So a couple of the other questions I have before we kind of continue rolling through the workshop. I wanted to specifically ask, if you're comfortable sharing, Ruth C. You posted your screenshot of your map, and I can see that there's like color and shading going on in that map. And I wanted to ask either in Zoom or if you want to unmute and share, that's cool too. What is the shading and color stuff for?
Sorry, I always get a weird lighting effect when I turn my camera on. Sure. The color and shading effect are just to try and separate out, because this is like a weird mix of like my job spaces, but then also kind of more personal spaces. So I'm a digital scholarship librarian. So this is tracking kind of what we do in digital scholarship and our digital scholarship spaces, and also my personal spaces. So the blue are like definitely just kind of me. And the green is like a mix of my role as a digital scholarship librarian and digital scholarship department, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is really interesting. And something I love seeing. Typically, when I do mapping exercises like this, I usually see at least one or two people add another dimension, right?
Yeah.
So we're working in two, and then what you've added here is at least one more dimension. I would say maybe even possibly more than one. But this is kind of cool because I think this is doing a little bit more than saying, all right, well, I made two maps for me as a person and me as my role, but it's recognizing that I, as a person, exist in a role in a department as a professional, whatever, right? And this kind of gets to mapping both those together, but also the fact that they blend. And I really love that. So that's really cool. Thank you. Mm-hmm. I think in the interest of time and moving along here, we're gonna kind of move on from the mapping exercises. I could do this probably forever because I find this stuff very interesting to talk about and hearing from other people. But what I want you to do is kind of keep an eye on your map. Don't discard it just yet. And if you're using Excalibur, you can just open the tab back up and go back there. But yeah, we're gonna hang on to those and use them later. So.
Thanks, Taylor. And a big thank you to everyone who has posted their comments in the chat and screenshots of their map in the chat as well. But yeah, as Taylor says, we're moving on now. So we are a good halfway through now. So if you have any other reflections and comments in the chat, then please post them on and we'll pick them up as we go along. But so we started kind of giving you a picture of where we were to begin with in our journey, and now we're going to move on to the next part, which is telling you what we decided to do about it and what the result of it was. So let's move on to the next slide and we'll tell you a little bit about what we did. So one of the things we mentioned at the start is kind of a real emphasis to build our critical digital and data literacies. And one of the ways in which we did that was just by having an experiment and by having a play. And that was one of the projects we did last year called Mission Mastodon. And for that, we set up a dedicated Mastodon server. And this was a collaboration between Reclaim Hosting and the Association for Learning Technology. And we got a few hundred folks involved in this experiment. Everybody wanted to try out the Fediverse, many of us for the first time. But we also wanted to look at, beyond the kind of individual user to what it would mean to run a server, what kind of decision making in terms of governance and monitoring and just administration really you'd need in order to keep this a safe space. And it was a really interesting experiment, which, brought out a lot of questions and challenges for us. And I think that is one of the things that we were kind of anticipating, but it was interesting to experience, sort of moving away from the sort of what Taylor earlier called like the sort of big box providers, where it's quite easy to share content and connect with people. It was interesting to see how that worked for us in reality.
It was interesting even for us, again, as the contact, we're a professional hosting company, right? Like the technical side of hosting Mastodon, that wasn't the thing that we were particularly worried about. Although we do talk about that in this, I put in the Zoom chat. We have a series of videos related to that experiment that you can talk about. We did want to kind of talk about what it was like to host a Mastodon instance for folks who wouldn't be familiar with doing that. But we were particularly interested in like, what does it mean to participate in a space like that? Who's going to be there and show up? And, um, even then taking that further into, okay, well, so what does this mean for us as a company, right? There's a lot of interesting experiments out there and I should have made note of this, but there are even like larger publications that have said like, hey, we're going to use Mastodon to give our journalists a safe space to have a Twitter-like place to post that they can use professionally should they choose to, right? And so that is really interesting because now, like, again, think about like, what if your employer owned Twitter? What does that mean? It's not a perfect analogy at all because Mastodon is interoperable. So Mastodon is kind of like Twitter, but everyone can have their own space that they can move between different providers of it, essentially. So you could have a server like Mastodon.social that tons of people use. You could have your own if you really wanted to, and you can move between them. You don't have to pick ahead of time. So
I really love that, and I think the other space that we wanted to mention as a place we explored that Taylor mentioned earlier was Discord. And there's, I think, two things that really we look at that we want to facilitate. One is for folk who use the open source platforms and software to learn from each other and with each other. I think that is one of the key challenges, as innovation in technology moves so fast, is there's not always someone in-house or within your institution who has that expertise. So learning from each other and facilitating that peer learning and knowledge exchange is one of the pieces that we felt we needed to create a space for and try and connect up the dots. But also, I think sharing kind of the impact of what the work is that is happening. And again, I think this is where looking beyond the kind of horizon of one institution, a lot of the people who are active in our Discord community or on Mastodon and the activities that we do want to kind of actively go beyond learning from just within their own institution and kind of look at what other people are doing and kind of try and, share some lessons learned and what's happening in other institutions and share theirs as well. So yeah, that's one of the kind of driving forces that we kind of felt we wanted to experiment with. And there is sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was gonna say, and in Discord for that, and we'll talk about risks and stuff later. Discord, I've already mentioned, not an open platform, right? It's a proprietary platform. We chose to use it knowing those risks for reasons we can dig into more if folks are interested. But essentially it came down to, we're going to make sure that all of the biggest stuff we're producing isn't only in Discord, and we're going to make a concerted effort around that. And also have other opportunities, like we have a forum that people can use that is an open web thing, and that was an idea of trying to leverage this closed platform that we knew some of folks who may want to participate in it already used, right? So that was a trade-off we made there.
Well, there is a number of other platforms and services that we experimented with. So if we go on to the next slide, those are some more beyond social media and ones that might be familiar to some of you here in the room. So we talked about this principle of kind of posting first on your own domain, and that is where we created a collaborative blogging space for everyone using Ghost, which is also a tool that we use for our monthly newsletter, the Roundup. And if you're new to Ghost and this is something that you haven't come across as a platform for newsletter, we're actually currently running a free and open short course on learning how to get started with Ghost. And I've signed up myself because I'm just getting started with that too. So we wanted to help, share widely and reach the people we want to reach, but also have some control over where the content sits to begin with. And then Taylor, did you want to talk a little bit about our workshops and PeerTube?
Yes, and I am, forgive me, multi-screening here, trying to grab the link for our Ghost Flex course, which, as you said, just started actually yesterday. So I just put a link into our one of the websites on the list, actually, where we post all of our resources for our what we call our Flex courses. They're sort of informal, low time commitment, synchronous or asynchronous little community course experiences. That's like the most complicated way to describe that possibly. But this is one of those things where, I work a lot with the Flex courses, and when you're in something, sometimes you can't describe it very well. That's a weakness of mine. Anyway, so we have the Ghost blogs, as Maren mentioned, blog.reclaimhosting.com and Roundup, and they're a little bit different format, a little bit different purpose for us. That's probably the core thing that we've done with all of this stuff, is to put most of our time and attention there. We also have a WordPress site, reclaimed.tech, that we specifically have to collect our workshop and course related materials in kind of one organized space. You might say you're using Ghost for this and WordPress for that. Yeah, we kind of use everything. That's sort of what we do. In our case, Ghost works really well for having newsletter functionality. So that's why we use it for those top two in this list. But reclaimed.tech is running WordPress and allows us to get kind of creative with the layout and look. I mean, I shouldn't say creative. It's a pretty standard looking site, but it's a little bit more structured, right? There's like categories for each particular post or course and things like that. Just it works for how we're using it. And then finally, sorry,
I just wanted to jump in there, because one of the things that I find is really powerful about this approach with Ghost is that we're not reliant on another platform to keep our content. And I think that has really frustrated me in recent years with, platforms I'd really bought into and I kind of invested a lot of time into. And then they're like, oh, I'm changing my business model, or, oh, we're now privatizing the service and you're no longer able to keep content on, on your profile, or there's only a limited view, or you need to sign up for the paid service. So that is one of the things that I find really attractive about the Ghost approach, because I will just be able to host that on my own WordPress blog site, and I won't have to kind of, have an external provider. So I just wanted to throw that in there, because I've definitely had that experience of, platforms changing their business model mid decade, and it's just suddenly like, oh, okay, it's all completely gone.
Well, and the tricky thing with that is it's hard to, you have to very critically look at what's most important once you've spent for you, maybe that's what you've spent the most time creating. That's kind of usually how I define that. I don't want to lose the things I spent a lot of time making, right? And then you kind of have to think of what those risks are, right? So, something like Ghost or WordPress, they're open source tools that can be hosted on a variety of platforms. Of course, we at Reclaim Hosting, we have platforms that can host those things, but other companies can too. So you're not completely dependent on a single company and their business decisions, or a single entity, whatever that is, right? That's, to me, the most important thing for things that really need to exist beyond for any amount of time, really.
Yeah. I completely agree.
The last one on here is perhaps the most experimental for us. And that was to have an alternative to YouTube. And this doesn't mean we left YouTube, but we wanted a place for an alternative place for video content. And we experimented a lot with this for quite a while, actually. And I would say over the last maybe year or so have kind of fallen to something that works well for us and does what we need it to do, and also doesn't create a bunch of extra work for us too, because video content can take a long time to make, and even longer or not even longer, but but adding on to that, posting it in multiple places and managing multiple things wasn't really sustainable for us. We're a very small company. I and a few other people at the company do a lot of our like blog post and video stuff, but it's only like a part of what we do. It's not, my job isn't posting to YouTube, you know, it's just a small part of what we do here at Reclaim. So what we've landed on is something called Reclaim. We're calling Reclaim TV, and we're using a couple different tools here. And I won't go into all the specifics, but basically we're using a tool called Owncast that allows us to live stream to it. And the cool thing about that is the live streams are at a domain we control, because Owncast is something that we can host. And that works really well for us. We can give people one URL to always go to. And we've even integrated chat into it. So we're using actually our Discord for the chat with that platform to kind of keep it all in our own space. And then we use a different tool called PeerTube, which allows us to essentially have an archive of videos, kind of like our YouTube channel. And the key component of that is PeerTube actually lets us mirror a YouTube channel. So the way this works is we stream to Reclaim TV, Owncast, and we upload, and then the video gets uploaded to YouTube. And then PeerTube is automatically pulling a copy of that video over. And it's not perfect. That we've got some, sometimes the videos take like a day because YouTube can sometimes take a long time to process things. But basically we always know that we have all of the video stuff we're doing is always going to be on our YouTube channel and on PeerTube. And it's important for us to have both, because YouTube is where people effectively watch video on the internet. I mean, that's the place, right? And we do have people who are already going there. We don't want to abandon that. But we also want another space that we control should YouTube ever become a problem for us in some unforeseen way. It could be a lot of different reasons. This allows us to do that without having to, double the work, essentially. So this was kind of a more creative and somewhat technical solution, but works really well for us.
Mm. And I just wanted to add, Taylor, as we're moving on to the next part now, is that, it's a lot about sustainability as well. So if you're, looking for keeping resources or data and content online for long periods, like having that independence and ownership and control over the content is such a key issue here. So yeah, it is definitely a big kind of sustainability factor as well. And yeah, Ed, your comment is super relevant here about definitely the future costs, and that's where the changing business models of platforms that you're very dependent on can really come in. But we want to move on. I'm very aware of time, and we've only got 25 minutes left and at least one big activity still to get through. So yeah, Taylor, what do you think? Are you ready? Should we move on?
Yeah. So what I'm gonna do is just very quickly revisit the Reclaim visitor resident map, and I'm gonna just add a couple things really to it. So most of these things didn't completely change, but we're simply adding to. So we already mentioned that we have a blog space. So I'm gonna actually add that to this same box. And we've got the roundup here as well. I think fits roughly in this same space. I know that they don't quite fit, but there we go. We added Mastodon to this general area, and then we added, I'm gonna actually just, we'll do it like this. YouTube and PeerTube is kind of how that has shaken out. And so we've essentially, in our case, bolstered what we were doing with other spaces. Now, this is a little bit not painting the full picture because of reclaimhosting.com. We do control, of course, but what we've added to this box is essentially the ability to communicate in a timely fashion with customers, right? And added newsletter functionality. So maybe the map isn't perfect here, but this is kind of where we are situated today. And I suppose we did also add, I'm just now realizing I didn't put it in here, we did also add Discord, which is kind of serving a similar function to Twitter and Mastodon for us in some ways. So what I would encourage you all to do is think about in your map, is there a space that you feel is at risk? And this means, is there, maybe you're looking at your map and you're like, I have a lot of personal and resident things that are important to me, and none of them I feel good about or control or something like that. Or maybe that's professional and resident for you. It could even be visitor, but obviously visitor is, I think by the nature of it, you're probably less worried about your own and controlling of it because you're not contributing to it in the same way. But that is not a hard and fast rule by any means. So look at your map, think about, is there something that is missing here? In what I would encourage most folks is, you probably, I've talked a lot about like Mastodon and like video stuff and PeerTube, but the simplest core thing for most people is that core concept of having a place that you can post to first, and that's probably just a website or blog of some kind. So if you don't have one of those, that could be it, but it could look different for you too.
I really love that. And the final exercise we want to go on to now is really helping you think through some different approaches and how they could work for you, particularly in the context of your own domain, whether that's one of the domains that we alluded to earlier with the SUNY showcase, or whether that's a personal blog. Many of the maps we saw, there were some. So the activity, and we hope you're up for it. This is a bit of a live collaborative one. We hope you're up for giving that a go. So Taylor and I just want to introduce that activity now. So if we go on to this bit here, it shows you what to do. So this is basically the before version of a postmortem. So I think we all know what a postmortem is. It's something we do after something has finished or someone has died, and it's an important learning process. And the pre-mortem is kind of giving you a safe space, either as a group or as an individual, to look at the risks around a change, a project, something new. And in this case today, we're going to be using it to look at the risks around changing social media networks, changing the tools and platforms we use. And we want you to start together with us thinking about, in your own context, what any risks could be. And then hopefully we'll have enough time to go on to giving you a sense of what kind of actions you could take in order to mitigate some of these risks. So one of you just posted in the chat around, if photos from Facebook, for example, disappeared one day, that would be a real loss. There might be others. So Taylor and I have got a whiteboard, and we added, I think, some examples already onto that, where you can join us, and we'll just post a link to that in the chat now as well, so you can join us here. And yeah, there are a couple of options here. So the blue top row of post-it notes where it says leaving a platform, joining a new network, finding a new community, that is categories, and we can add more of these. And then in yellow, or in any other color that you like, we want you to think about some risks that you would worry about, or that you are worried about, when you adopt new platforms and when you look at new tools and maybe joining a new community or leaving a platform. So whilst you start adding some in, and feel free to just get started now, I wanted to share a couple of my own. And Taylor, I don't know if you want to add some in as well.
Sure.
But basically, my ones I wanted to kind of start with, when I've thought about leaving a platform, and in my case, there was a couple, because I was changing jobs, I was leaving Twitter, there was a lot of changes. And one of my biggest worries was losing the connection to my network and losing touch with people that I considered, being in my community. So that was definitely one of the risks that I identified. And for me, it totally came true. So, I definitely lost touch. And when I then thought about joining a new network, I just didn't know where to start. I didn't know how to get involved with people. I didn't know where to find them. It was definitely a risk that I found. And then also joining a new network, I wasn't really sure, would I be welcome? What's the tone of the discussion here? Like, particularly as I was changing jobs as well. I didn't really know, what is the kind of vibe? How can I present myself? Is it very professional? Is it more informal? So those are the kinds of things that I immediately thought about when I looked at changing my kind of tools and platforms. How about you, Taylor? What comes to mind in your end?
Yeah, I mean the big one for me is often like the time investment. Every time you start invest, and I'm thinking about this from again the context of Reclaim as sort of a company. Was thinking like, all right, every new platform or tool we engage with, we have to decide how we're going to manage that across a team because it
Yeah,
doesn't happen for free, right? In terms of time, and often I guess it doesn't happen for free in other ways too, in terms of literal dollars sometimes, but I think often, most importantly, it's time. And how do we make it sustainable, which is obviously very related to that. So that was a big one in joining a new network.
hmm
And that's one I would always consider. I would also say there's also technical challenges too. So we're talking about,
definitely.
and that's always kind of where my brain goes because I'm a little bit broken that way. But like, I always kind of think about like, well, we could do all this cool stuff and self-host our own YouTube alternative, but obviously we had to make that work and put the time investment in to make sure we understood how those tools worked. They're not something that I spend a lot of time in a given week
Yeah,
tinkering with, but there was a lot of upfront investment for us, and it was an unknown amount of upfront investment. That was the hard thing. So I would say, it's you could, but depending on what you're concerned, you could make a whole category out of technical stuff. But I think for now, I'll just say like,
yeah.
technical challenges is just a single one that I'll put here for the moment.
Yeah, I think that's a big one for me. And I think someone else just posted as well, like how to communicate and teach visitors about the change. And I think that piece is so big for me because like technology, like particularly if you work in a blended team or remote or virtual, or you collaborate a lot at a distance, how many times has it happened to you that you started your collaboration platform and something changed? Like, the platform you're very familiar with now has different options. Suddenly, when you give someone a thumbs up, it makes a thumbs up in the background. There is all kinds of different file sharing conventions happening. Like, I think even if you want to change tools or platforms, the reality of kind of iterative changes and adapting to those is a big one. And that's just the kind of essential tools and platforms. So adding more change on top of that and kind of disseminating that information across an institution or across a bigger community is very challenging. So I absolutely agree.
If folks want to add more challenges here, you can either copy a sticky note or you can use this little tool on the side here, sticky note, to add a new one. Um, I
Yeah,
think,
and we sorry, I was just going to say, if anybody wants to kind of grab the mic and just jump in, we would love to hear as well if you have any other thoughts, particularly if you are thinking about adopting a new platform or if you're looking to leave one that is no longer feeling like a good space for you. If you want to raise your hand or just switch on your camera and we'll come to you. We'd also love to hear from you.
I'll also mention that this whiteboard is um we're not going to be like posting this whiteboard. So I mean, maybe don't like put super personal stuff here, but this is going to live inside of this workshop, and then after we're done, we're going to get rid of the whiteboard. So
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're going to have 5 minutes on this. And then in the last 10 minutes of the workshop, just wrap up with giving you lots of resources to take away and getting final comments and feedback. So yeah, who in the group would like to share some reflections on where you are in your social media journey? I think I am still, trying to adjust to kind of getting my feet in the Fediverse, and there are so many moments when I'm like, oh, I missed something. I didn't know how it works. I'm constantly having to upskill. So I wonder if anybody else in the room feels similarly. Ed, I can see you posted a comment. Did you want to come in with your mic and just kind of elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, I just shared. I'm pretty reckless about trying new tools when it's personal. If it's only going to impact me, that's fine. But if we're thinking about something for my department, it's such a bigger question about like, okay, how many people could do the back end support for this? How many people could keep this up? What if I won the lottery tomorrow and quit my job? Would this be time that like is immediately abandoned after I left my job? Like, would anybody else in my institution pick this up if I wasn't here?
And what are the consequences of that, right? So certain types of work, you know, can just exist as is for some amount of time after someone leaves, and that's okay for certain types of work, and it's not for others, and that has its own risks, right? Because it could be technical things. It might just be like, oh, this was a newsletter I was writing and now it doesn't happen anymore, and that's kind of disappointing, right? So there's all kinds of facets to that, I would say, too.
That's a really good one. Yeah, the sort of if I won a lottery tomorrow scenario is I think particularly relevant to us who work in educational communities of practice. There's often one or two very engaged members of staff, who are absolutely the lifeblood of these communities. And I think often when they move, they have a sort of certain sense of stickiness that they attract others to kind of engage and be part of that community. And I think when they leave and they move on, it can easily become a ghost town. And I think the sort of time investment, the internal investment piece there is really important when we think about sort of long-term changes and that sustainability piece as well. So I want to give you another minute or two, and then Taylor and I are going to wrap up. You've been with us for nearly 90 minutes, so we want to make sure we keep to time and give you a lot of resources to take away. So yeah, we're going to maybe give it another 2 minutes for any other comments, questions, or thoughts, and then we'll wrap up with our resources to finish. Taylor, do you have any final reflections from your point of view?
I think, I just hope that when folks are thinking about, their web presence, I hope some of the stuff we've done today can be, directly applicable in terms of a thought process here. So I would, we aren't just doing the mapping and pre-mortem because it's a fun way to do stuff in a workshop. I think this style of thinking, and it doesn't have to be a direct exercise like this, but often when you're working in a team, it's helpful too. Can really be a good approach to try and identify sort of your risks and weaknesses, and how you're, where you need to build more capacity, or where you need to be exploring new spaces, and then critically evaluating, can we do that right now? And how are we going to mitigate some of these risk factors, right? So some of that may be joining a new network. I saw someone put privacy and data sharing. Love that. Love to see that. And so some of those, mitigating some of that risk sometimes increases the risk of others. This is something has already come up, right? But like, you may say, you know what, for privacy reasons, we need to self-host. We need to be on our own Mastodon server, right? That our department can be on. And it can still, talk to everybody else, but we need to do that. Okay, well, now we've got an increased risk of making sure that we have capacity to maintain that thing, right? So a lot of these things are at odds, and you have to decide what is most important and make trade-offs sometimes.
I agree. And I think my final comment is maybe just that's what's really inspired us about this conference theme around digital activism and being, digitally empowered. And we wanted to really share with you today some of the kind of, thinking and processes that Taylor just mentioned that help us make these decisions as a team, because it's not very clean cut, is it? It's quite a messy process navigating through the digital space. So just to wrap up then, we're just going to share a few resources and then we're going to finish the session. So Taylor, do you want to just walk us through the resources?
Yeah, we have a handful of things here. So I already posted a link to our Mission Mastodon where we specifically talked a lot about Mastodon and how it works and all that kind of stuff. And that was our temporary Mastodon server that we talked about. I'd highly recommend that. By the way, we're gonna I'll put a link to our whole slide deck in here right after we're finished, and maybe we can get that distributed out some other way too. But we also have a open media flex course. So if you're interested in some of the like YouTube alternative stuff I was talking about, I would recommend you go to reclaimed.tech and go to past flex courses. And we've got one in here, open media ecosystem, that has a ton of resources on various tools, an open radio, like online internet radio station tool, video conferencing tool, YouTube alternatives. So if you're interested in and excited by that kind of possibility, I would recommend you check that out. I would definitely recommend you check out and explore SUNY Create. So I think one of the most fundamental things is having a controllable web presence using open tools. And I think almost anyone can make use of that. And so you have that resource. So if you're in the SUNY system and you can use it, sunycreate.cloud is where you go. There's information there. They have a delightful showcase website and documentation that you can check out. And if you're not part of the, or if this is not an option for you to use, you can host with us at reclaimhosting.com as well. I would recommend you check us out, of course. Start a website, post there, and then use that to feed your other channels. That's my, if you're taking one thing that I think almost anyone can benefit from, that's what I would say. In addition to that, we've got our current Flex course. You can find that at events.reclaimhosting.com, which is specifically talking about newsletters and using Ghost for that. So I would also recommend you check that out. First session just aired yesterday. And then finally, we have a lot of community resources too. So you can check out our Discord if that's your kind of thing, reclaimed.tech/Discord. You can also follow us on Mastodon at reclaim.rocks, at reclaimhosting.com, or sorry, at reclaimhosting. And you can check out our monthly newsletter, roundup.reclaimhosting.com. And we also have a blog that I've linked before in here too. Yeah, I mean, we thank you all for your time. This was
thank you very much for having us,
being
Paul.
game and dreaming and exploring with us. So
thank you both so much. You've given us so much to think about, and what I really appreciate is so many new tools to think about trying out. And the resources, Taylor, that you've just been describing that Reclaim has created are, I think, incredibly valuable. I was thinking under the heading of risks about the really interesting back and forth between people on the subject of migrating to Mastodon, between people saying it's just too hard and other people saying, what are you talking about? It's really not that, it's really not that hard. People are really passionate on both sides. And if you're feeling, well, it's a reminder that you have to think not just about your own capacity, but the capacity of the people that you're hoping to connect with in some new space that you want to go to. If you want to lure people to that new space, it's not enough just to say, oh, it's really not that hard. Just go look and try and keep at it. It's not that hard. It's really useful to be able to point them to resources like the resources that you all have created. So this is fabulous. Thank you both so much again. Really appreciate it.
thank you.
Thanks everybody for joining us, and we're really looking forward to what's promising to be a fantastic event the next few days. So thanks very much for having us, Paul, and everybody in the team.
Thanks
Got a question
everyone
for you.
For being here. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Ed had a question.
Yeah, I've got a question. you kind of gave us the fire hose. Oh, we're doing videos on PeerTube, and we're doing newsletters on Ghost, and we're doing blogs, and if you were an organization that was thinking about trying to reclaim a little bit of your socials, what do you think has gone the best or the easiest at reclaim hosting? What was the highest impact that you had if you were going to just do one thing, not like you weren't going to do PeerTube and Jitsi and everything all at once? Where would you start?
I think definitely our newsletter.
A newsletter?
I agree.
Yeah, definitely. And we kind of have two newsletters, sort of. You don't have to do that, but that has had the most direct in, I wouldn't call it, we're not really measuring, I guess, but like we have people who say, I saw this in the newsletter and have more questions about it. And we're like, cool, people are looking at this thing, So I would say that's probably one of the highest impact things, but for and in some ways is most closely aligned with what we were already doing, right?
Yeah. And I just want to add to that as well. The newsletter has a beautiful option for everybody in the team to get involved. And I think that's one of the key challenges for organizations is that digital confidence. And it's a very practical tool that you can take in turns, that you can all contribute to, that's very collaborative, but it has an external impact. So I think that is one of the pieces that, isn't really low hanging fruit, like in terms of trying to reclaim some of that. And, you can then repost it across other social media from that newsletter. So that's really helpful. And I think Taylor hasn't gone into that in depth, but one of the things that Ghost does is to give you that whole archive. So, it's not a newsletter and an email that then disappears down someone's inbox. It becomes an archive of itself. So if you're looking for a team or a project or a department to have a web presence, the newsletter is kind of both in one. It gives you the forward-facing page where people can land and also the subscription. So I think that is definitely, I think it's funny, Taylor. We hadn't thought of this, but we're both like newsletter for sure.
I think that's it for us. And it's also something that people understand and can look at and kind of go, okay, this is a website I can visit. Oh, I can get it as an email. I think people mostly understand that. And it's cool too, because there's another level of like the technical stuff too, of like, if someone is sort of already engaged and they're like, oh, I want it in my RSS, reader. Yeah, you can do that too, if that's your thing. And you don't have to get it in your email inbox, but that doesn't have to be something that's a prerequisite to getting value, if that makes sense, for someone who wants to read it.
And it would seem to me, for an organization as big as SUNY, that newsletters, if we went the commercial route and we're trying to like purchase from MailChimp, for example, we'd instantly be in the highest tier, and it would be costing $350 or more per month, because just the number of users that we're impacting. And so choosing an open source solution as the newsletter foundation might be particularly good because it's more scalable. Obviously, there are costs that do have to go up to run a bigger server, but not as large as, like, I just pulled up MailChimp pricing, and if you have over, 100,000 people on the on the list, it's instantly in the $350 per month tier to be at that scale of MailChimp.
Well, and we didn't really go far into this, but we basically just completed our journey of getting off of MailChimp recently. And the big part of that was using Ghost and newsletter tools associated with it. And we're relatively small, right, as far as a company goes. But it just wasn't working for us, not only from a cost perspective, but again, it didn't have that impact. It wasn't discoverable. The only good ways to get on the list was for us to put you on the list, or we could put a widget on our website. But it's so much better for people to see the actual content and then decide, yeah, I want that, so that was an easy win for us. And there's also some knock-on effects too of, if you're doing this in a larger institution, you may actually have some of the most costly parts, which is typically email delivery. You probably already have that in your IT, that you could hook up something like WordPress to do this instead of having to use an external provider. Or it may be simpler to just use an external provider that, we use Mailgun, which is, it costs us like cents. It's very inexpensive. So but you have those options, right? Because you're using an open tool, you can decide, you can even change your mind without having to start over. So.
Thank you so much, folks.
Yes. Thanks
It's been
again.
fantastic.
Yes.
If you have any further questions, you know where to find us.
Wonderful. And a reminder to folks who are still hanging here, as Jen put in the chat, the next workshop begins at 10:45, and people are welcome to just hang in the room between now and then.
Refill your coffee,
Right.
recharge. We'll see you in a
I'm
bit.
gonna do that.
Thank you very much. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, you too.